Also, I mean, I think the most important thing, right, is just what's the context in which we're setting everything up. So I love this idea, and it's one of the reasons I actually got into research.
So tell me what got you into research. So what was the thing that was compelling?
Yeah, well, so I spent a couple decades in advertising, running brand strategy departments and things like that. And this was probably in the late 2000s. Worked on a lot of financial based clients. And we would get a lot of briefs like, let's help empower women because they're not confident with money. And it was this thing as a woman myself who loves money, loves the market, has been a saver my whole life. I was like, this is a bunch of bullshit. I mean, the idea of what confidence is depends on who you ask, right? And I think women in general, especially from a research lens, have just gotten the short end of the stick on a lot of things based on not even asking the question of pure definition. Like, what is confidence when it comes to financial security? What is confidence when it comes to financial growth? And so for me, when I then transitioned into full-time research roles in like the mid 2010s, I started to look into those with clients, whether it was P&G or PIMCO or Capital One, et cetera. What do women really think about money, and how are they defining it differently? And I think I've been on that path for about 10 years, knocking down those doors to try to say, like, it's not a confidence issue. It's the way in which we frame things and the conversations we have around women. Because if you look at, for example, our work that we did with PIMCO about women investors, they're not like worried about their confidence levels. In fact, they're really smart decision makers who are thinking both short term and long term. And they are balancing those two things at once, the way they balance motherhood and the workforce. Like, women are exceptional at balancing those kinds of decisions, and it makes them exceptional investors. And it's shocking, like that research we did in maybe 2018, that was breakthrough research at the time. The financial world really did not understand how women, how to view women and their relationship with money. So it's the thing that got me into research, and it's the thing that keeps me going. Like, how do we frame things for what is the reality around women, not the perception around how women are acting or being perceived in society.
Yeah, because I think that I guess the question is how confident are you that that news is spreading? Because when I'm doing research around this, I'm still seeing some of the old patterns and the old conversations around less confident, really being bold investors. When they invest, right, they hold on longer, the returns are higher, so very thoughtful investors. So maybe the conversation is we're less like aggressive growth oriented, but we're actually really good at investing and kind of letting things ride because we've invested in things that we've cared about and that we believe in around that. And that women often fire their financial advisors within a year of either inheriting a significant amount of wealth or somehow sort of inheriting someone else's financial advisor. That was an interesting thing, really, really high churn and really high turnover of women not feeling that they're getting heard, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we had a stat at one point, it's probably 6 or 7 years ago, like women would rather clean their toilets than talk to their financial advisor. And I don't think that's because women don't like to care or talk about money. It's because how they're treated at the other end of this side. Like, so for me, this is pretty personal in ways as well. Like, I have a financial advisor that I share with my father. They assume like I don't know anything about money and then talk down to me until they see like my balance sheet and my stock trading that I've done throughout the years, right? There's a perception that is going to take a long time to recreate in a system that is still very patriarchal, right? So I think even it's interesting because as a researcher, when you kind of break news and you feel like, okay, we've done it, we've said it, we can't keep saying the same thing over again. It's actually, that's a fallacy. The only way to create change is keep saying the same things again. And I think in today's society, we all lose that that dedication towards what is the narrative that we need to communicate and how do we consistently communicate it, but also what is something I'm extremely interested in, and I know you and I kind of talked about this, but what's like the vision for the future? So not only what's today, but like where does this all head tomorrow? Like, these Women International Days or months are great, but like, what's the real plan? And if we're good at both short-term thinking and long-term thinking, let's galvanize around that and let's really talk about it, right? So
yes. Oh my God, I'm so excited we found each other. That's exactly where I am. I'm going to do the way back thing for one more second, and then we'll jump forward, which is the way that the data is interpreted when you talk about context, right? Because I think there are behavioral differences between men and women, right? Women aren't trying to behave exactly the way that men are, but we then have interpreted it then as being either less aggressive or less this or less that. So full disclosure, my brother is a financial advisor. He has been my advisor for a long time. Was always a little more conservative with mine than I think he didn't want to mess it up. And recently actually introduced me to a young woman in his practice because I felt like I wanted to have somebody I can have a different kind of conversation with. I didn't want to be like my brother all the time. I would get really emotional in these conversations, Libby. Like I would feel like shame, or I'd feel embarrassment, or I'd feel whatever. Like it was tricky. So now I get to work with Allie, who is great. But he and I have had very long conversations about the fact that he has been assigned the task of aggressive growth with all of his clients and protecting wealth for all of his clients. So when I start to say I want more of an ESG type portfolio, or I want to really consider certain things that I don't want Meta anywhere near anything that I'm investing in, it's been a tricky thing for him to reconcile. He wants to hear it and he wants to understand it, but it just goes so against the grain of what he has been mandated to go do for so long. Right?
Yeah, I think so one thing you will see across women leadership in terms of research, financial aid, considering like financial portfolios, the way that people manage teams, the way that they manage their household, is this ability to hold two things at once. And women are just particularly good at that. So you can say, I want growth, but I also need to consider these other things. And it's not that men can't be good at that, but historically they've had that one thing that they're going after, and they're going after it really strong or really well. However, the strength of how women think is more holistic, right? Like, how is this going to impact myself, my community, my family? Now, that being said, it was interesting when we did the PIMCO research. There was a hypothesis that women would hands down give everything to ESG, and they were just kind of these ESG investors. And the way that the hypothesis was kind of stated as like, women are soft in that way. Like we will sacrifice everything to the benefit of the world. And when we went into and talked to investors all over the world and then did the research, what we found is like, that's not true, that they want those short-term results and the long-term, but they want it in cohesion with better business practices, because women believe that the better business practices is what's going to get you the net end result. Not just that ESG is nice to have and that we should sacrifice everything in our wealth to make sure that happens, but just that it's a better business practice. And it's so interesting how the world was kind of gearing towards that zone, and it's had a massive recalculation and pushback from that. But I think at the heart of it, women really understand that is where we're going to find the most net prosperity for ourselves and our communities.
I talk a lot about when I'm giving talks about not just being the professional or in this role as I would say even investor, but that we're humans and that we're members of society. And this has always been a nested system. It's existed forever. These are things that should never be trade-offs. They all sit inside the same, nested circles, but the boundaries between those things are becoming more porous, and we're seeing the connections between those things. So we make a decision here, it crosses all the way. And I think that women have been naturally gifted in being able to see across those boundaries and haven't made these things so compartmentalized and so separate from one another, which is why actually then as an investor, I will just say, going to try and then look for something that's easy, so we're not trying to pick 37 different things and trying to find a portfolio of things. It was really hard. I ended up doing my own cut here, paste here, put this thing together here, because most ESG portfolios don't have enough tech in them.
Yeah.
And then that you then are trying to figure out what are the safe tech companies that I want to invest in, and women have to go make some of those decisions. So I just think that the product set hasn't necessarily kept up with this more holistic, short-term, long-term, value-centric, right, way of investing, not just ESG way of investing. And there's a big opportunity there.
I agree with that. And not even just from investing, but for consumption behaviors, right? Like women are the dominant force of household decision making when it comes to consumption and subscriptions, and they are deciding primarily what is spent in households. And so when you think about like Scott Galloway's resist and unsubscribe, what role are women going to be playing in something where they get really intentional about where they spend their money? I think it definitely goes into the investing circuit, but it also is just like a day-to-day choice on, am I subscribing to Disney after the Jimmy Fallon thing, or Jimmy Kimmel thing, excuse me. But it's those kinds of choices that we see really ramping up in our survey. And what's really interesting is last year, I think young women, I'm really watching hardcore to see what their models and their change behavior looks like. We see that 46% of young women last year said they were boycotting the economy, that they did not want to participate in the economy because of mostly due to the health and women's rights things that were being pushed back from their points of view. What's interesting, we just reran that study and we found that men are now aligned, young men, Gen Z men are now aligned with young women saying like, we're not also participating in this economy due to conflict of beliefs with the administration or other types of things that we are
so let's talk about that.
Protesting.
Can we unpack that a little bit more? Because again, we've been seeing research for a long, long time that always said first it was millennials, then it was Gen Z, that they want to shop with values, that it really matters. Have also that brand survey, that brand study that you and I have both seen forever that showed that people didn't have their trust in brands continued to go down, down, down. Yet our whole economy is being driven by consumer spending. Consumer spending continues to still be really robust and strong. So we were always trying to make sense between this professed desire to hold brands accountable and then the actual reality, not so much, right? They're using Shine and Temu and H&M and all the ones that, fast fashion, et cetera. So I'm trying to figure what's reality versus what is professed and that. And then to your point, how that is showing up for the youngest of our brethren.
I think I think it's a great question, and it's something that we get a lot. We've gotten it since the era of Gen Z started, where these young people, they profess to be super into sustainability, and then they buy from Forever 21 at the time or Temu now, right? But it's one of those things where you can hold two things in your hands, and they can be true at the same time. So you can say, my aspiration and my values are these, and I will shop to a certain degree at certain retailers that I can afford or I can be a part of. And in other cases, I can't afford to make those choices yet. The thing about marketing and culture right now is the receipts in the long tail are longer and growing. So if you think about, when I grew up in like the 80s and the 90s, we remembered things, but it was just the newspaper clipping or magazine clippings that would remind you of what's going on. In this case, we see, videos coming up from 2013 about people's policies and their shifts, and Gen Z are calling you out on that. So while they're not the perfect consumer and they're young, and I do think their intentionality about calling people out and changing things is where they're finding their political power. For example, right, after the Disney backlash and everyone unsubscribed, Kimmel was back and reunited, right? Spotify also had ICE ads on their platform. People en masse canceled Spotify. Spotify now does not have those government relationships with ICE ads, and subscriptions are back in January. So it's not a consistent like, we will not shop with you, we will shop with you, but it is like, hey, this wallet dollar amount is going away. And I think women specifically are understanding their ability to not spend. I mean, if you think about what happened with Target last year and what continues to happen, you know, the female shopper was the Target shopper. And, you know, being from Minneapolis, I can tell you, I want that brand to do better and survive. Like, it's one of my favorite brands ever.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping for that comeback, but it's got to align with those female shopper values.
Well, I think a part of that is that they just have a lot more choice, right? So if you don't do it, I'll go somewhere else that does. But so the question back to, they don't want to participate in the economy, then what does that look like? Because again, is that a gap between professing and doing, or do we actually see, I see the boycotts. And we actually, you know, again, I go back to Facebook too. At one point, 750 advertisers also boycotted, and then, you know, they changed their algorithm, and then when they came back, all of a sudden the algorithm was back. So I also hold advertisers, FYI, accountable for all this stuff. But if you go back to consumers who are holding, again, the brands accountable, do we see a shift in or a decline in spending, and is the data just not catching up?
I think the data is, I think there is a say versus do in data. I think the thing that you have to think about is, what is the overall desire and what kind of shifts and aspirations long term is that going to have? So for example, January on social media was called low spend January or something like that. There was a whole low spend movement. It's why thrift stores are back. It's why there's this like Facebook marketplace is, you know, the most popular it's ever been. We're going into a barter-based culture because people want to support their local communities and local businesses more. Now, is the infrastructure set up for them to do that? Not entirely, right? For example, my daughter was sick. I live in Brooklyn. She got sick on a pillow. I don't know where to go get a pillow if it's not Amazon or Target in my Brooklyn area. There's no like small mom and pop shop. So I think those are things that are like people are wrestling with. But I think the intentionality of what things look like and where people are finding their power is going to have lasting effects as these young people gain more discretionary income or are on the end side of those receivers of the wealth transfer as well.
Yeah, so let's talk now about what we think it's going to look like over the next however many years or decades. So the stats around the wealth transfer seem to differ. Is it $30 trillion? Is that the numbers? I hear 30 to 60, which is a huge gap between those two numbers. But that is a combination of inheriting husband's wealth, inheriting parents' wealth, and then creating their own wealth, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, so there's that. There's like, what does it look like in 2030? I think the prediction is $30 trillion in wealth. I mean, a decade ago, though, it was only 7.4 trillion. So the aspect ratio of how it's accelerating is really high and super compelling and interesting.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm really enthusiastic about or I'm interested in is the Wall Street Journal just came out and talked about the amount of billionaires that are out there now. And there's, whether you agree with billionaires is probably another whole conversation, right? And that's something we've been actually researching and monitoring. But there's 154 billionaires now that are women. And that is up a lot from previous years. But what's most interesting about it is 60% of them are at least partially self-made. So it's not just the inheritance, which is really interesting to talk about, but it's that women are out there making billions of dollars, whether it's Taylor Swift or Beyonce or Rihanna, but also like, you know, Lindsay Snyder from In-N-Out, right? So there's just lots of different dimensionality for the way that women are building wealth and then leveraging their wealth out in society as well.
So that's, I think, the interesting question. So as I was thinking through this whole question, first of all, do women aspire to be billionaires? You know, we always love Dolly Parton. Dolly Parton is like my, soul sister. And there was a headline the other day that she could have been a billionaire if she wanted to be, but she's so busy giving her money away to all these other things. Like she wasn't striving for that unicorn goal. So do we see women really caring as much about that desire or that need to amass in that way or accumulate that much in their own way? We also see women like dumping out of C-suite roles sooner, right? Because they're like, you know what it takes to actually hold that position is just not something I'm willing to sacrifice my entire life for. So maybe
Yeah.
also giving up the opportunity to becoming wealth holders in that way. So I do think there's an interesting, is that even an aspiration?
Yeah,
Period. Let's start there.
it's a great question. I could dig further into the research on their aspirations about billionaires, because we literally have that question, and we know, what's interesting in the research is that Gen Z despise billionaires, yet they want to become them. So we're always in this great, like, American story of, eat the rich, but then wanting to become the rich in that case. I think, though, when you talk to women about money, they generally fall on one or two paths. They're either really comfortable about wanting money and gaining money and seeing it as part of, breaking down the system and being part of the system so that they can use their money to change things. Or they're like, that's not the end goal. The end goal is something different. So the definition of why you'd want financial power just depends on the type of, it's not a monolith, it's the type of woman you are. I would say, this is a little bit of a side note, but, there's a lot of talk about women's ambition, and because you mentioned women stepping out of the C-suite a little bit. I know McKinsey and Lean In talked about how, like, women aren't as ambitious anymore. We did a different study, again, to get back to that idea of, like, what definition is. We did a study with Chief to figure out, well, what is ambition to women, and are they less or more ambitious? And these women, they were all, you had to be like 15 years VP, director, or higher in major organizations, and they were all said that they were more ambitious than they had been 5 years ago. And the way they were defining ambition, though, was financial power, autonomy, and flexibility, right? So it's like, yeah, could they be a CEO? Sure. Could they create their own company or their own entertainment group? That's another way to get power. The important part with the money conversation and the ambition conversation is that women want to be in the arena. They're not stepping out of the arena and not stepping back. They're just doing it differently, right? Okay. So that's kind
100%.
of part of it, right?
Well, I was going to say, so even I'm older than you are, so when my children were roughly the same age as yours, my daughter was 5, actually prior to that, when I first started my career, I was working 4 days a week. I just declared that from the moment I was pregnant with my first child. I was working at a very, very aggressive advertising. I was Shy at Day. Remember Shy back in the day?
Yeah.
Shy at Day and Night. And I wanted to only work 4 days a week. Even if I was working 40 hours, I was still better than 60 hours is the way I looked at it. I just wanted 1 day a week when I was doing something. And I took a financial hit for that. So that wasn't the time when we were doing 80% for 100% of the pay. That was like I took a pay cut for that, but it was worth it for me to have that.
Yeah.
I was also the primary breadwinner in my house. Like I just felt like I needed to be able to balance it out some way. And then to your point, at some point when my daughter was young, I decided that I wanted to quit and start my own company. It was just much more, I wanted that flexibility and I wanted that autonomy and I wanted to be able to navigate it. You do take a trade-off for that. Like some years I made way more money, some years I didn't make as much money, right? It was much more volatile. But I do think that ambition of wanting to still stay in the work and create the work that was meaningful to me and not that was dictated by somebody else was a really, really critical part of it. Like I love working, but I want to work on the stuff that makes me happy, like being able to do this podcast conversation versus, something that someone else asked me to go do. And we're seeing that in the numbers, right? I think 49% of all businesses that were started this past year were started by women. Even though we don't get the funding. I mean, this is where you still get back to a whole nother conversation, which is, are women funded at the rate that men are funded? And we know that is abysmally, the answer is no. It even went from 2% to 1%, I think, this past year. Like it's going so in the wrong direction, which is then also interesting that women then are looking for different routes to being able to go build what it is they go build. So there's a lot of conversation around how women are redesigning what ambition looks like and the contribution they want to make to the work that the world needs, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think because women have just a different perspective on it, right? And I think the important thing to recognize is, like, we're all on each other's shoulders here, right? So what my mom was able to do by just being in the workforce, being the first one out of her family to, like, put herself through college, working for the government in a steady way for years that allowed my father to be an entrepreneur, it allowed me then to see the workplace differently and interact with it differently. And then I think what we saw when we were doing all the chief work and the chief surveys was that, some women are taking all of this knowledge to then create their own empires. Other women are taking this knowledge and they are changing this organizations from the inside out, right? And they really are the ones who can orchestrate that change. And especially right now, because of AI, because of the business transformation that's happening, women are exceptionally good at adapting to that change, but bringing people along the journey in an important way. So I think, that's why I'm very optimistic about where women's wealth can go from here, because even though there's the barriers and the VCs aren't investing in women, and there's been bad behavior that's kind of returned in a lot of ways to market incentives around women, I think women are going to take this moment and they're going to run with it as much as they can.
So talk to me about what gives you that confidence. Like, how do you see that?
I see it because when we asked the women in chief, like when we asked them around, how does it feel to lead right now amongst this disruption? A lot of them are the same things that everyone would feel, like fear, concern, worry, but they were also incredibly bullish about the opportunities that they could find within their own career and the organization around AI and their ability to navigate that. We are in field right now in another study about how women will probably be, our hypothesis is they will be the great orchestrators internally of business transformation. So when you think about what holds us from the businesses of today for the businesses of the next 5 years, everything has to do with transforming the workforce to understanding the journey we're on. And so there will be like AI builders and there will be transformation leaders, but really it's the orchestrators, the people who can bring people along and bring them to that net outcome in a way that everyone feels satisfied and good, that is going to create probably the most productivity. And we have a kind of hypothesis that will probably be women or men who lead like women, that have those qualities. I don't think it's just, the feminine leadership qualities. So in that way, I am more optimistic that women will find a lot of paths to power, financial power.
This conversation is more around women and money, but it is interesting about women and AI. There is also data that is really inconclusive. Like, it's hard to find it really clear, and you probably have better data on your end. But women's participation with AI, using it more, trusting it, feeling confident in it, there still seems to be big gaps in that. And in thoughtful ways, like what I was reading at some point was that women are slower to adopt because they were worried about the ethical concerns and they're worried about the environmental impact, right? Sure. So actually really thoughtful reasons to not be jumping right into this.
Yeah, and I think that's right. So again, we're in field. I don't have the total data, but what I would say is the conversations that we've had behind closed doors with lots of C-suite leaders is that it's okay to pause. So the big issue right now, right, with AI and leadership is this idea that if you vocalize that you are pausing or you are considering something or you are considering the long game, which again, we're good at short term and long term, then you are, plastered as a technology lagger, and that's dangerous for your career. So I think a lot of these conversations are happening. They're just behind the scenes a little bit more. And I think the way that, again, when you think about the word confidence with women are always, like, in everything we do, whether it's employee skills, whether it's money, whether it's salaries, whether it's love, men are more confident always in their capabilities. So is it that women are underconfident, or is it that men are tend to be overconfident? And who cares what the answer is, right? It's the comparing of the two. It's just not apples to apples in that way. We look at it differently.
Right, I think that's true. I do think that, but a big part of participating and being able to be influential in the AI world is getting in and playing with it. It's trying it out. It's, it's really engaging with it. I've got 2 boys and a girl, and I would say boys really confident, girl, and part of what I'm trying to encourage her to do is create a podcast for her peers that is, why should I give a shit about AI? because I think
That's
it's really
great.
important that they do.
Yeah.
Right? I know.
Yeah.
I'll just say it out loud. Harper also, Libby thinks it's a great idea. So it's not just her mother. But, okay, so going back to the real thesis of this, which is what do we think the world's going to look like 10 or 20 years from now? Like, imagine in 20, 50, 25 years from now, when women have had this opportunity to both inherit and create their own wealth and the kind of influence that they want with the kind of values that we get to impart in society with that influence. Do we see women participating more in politics? Do we see, opting out and creating different kinds of economic systems? Do we imagine that they are cultural, to your point, leaders thinking about this through storytelling? Because what I think has been really interesting is to see the women in wealth rise and the number of billionaire women, but we don't see them buying big, huge media companies the way men do and influencing that conversation. We don't see them as huge political donors. There's like one or two like really significant women, often on the more conservative side, that are really extreme donors. Like, where are they? Do we imagine, if we were going, because you haven't done the research yet, it doesn't exist yet, right? But we're going to project or imagine where the shift would come from. What do we think we're going to do with all this money?
I think we're going to have a kind of reset. I think, so let's imagine that women control at least half, if not more than half, of the wealth in the future. I think the way...
And we're close to that? How close are we to that now? We're at 20-something%?
We're in the 30s, so 34% in the US. But like we should go, like they project parity by the mid 30s. That's parity. Now, parity always seems to lag, so that's why I'm like, oh, maybe by the 50s, but hopefully more soon, right?
That's awesome.
With that, I think that, again, because of the kind of holistic nature of if my family is doing well, if this community is doing well, if the city is doing well, everyone is doing well, there's a much stronger sense of systems and ecosystems that women are really good at wrapping their heads around. I imagine more of that money is going to flow into those things. And let me give you a couple examples. Like when you think about the VC world and that only 1% of funding goes to women, and people of color and communities of color and all that kind of stuff, like you are leaving so much on the table just because you don't understand the use case in a lot of cases, right?
Exactly.
And so,
or the growth projection, it's like it's not as aggressive.
Or the growth projection. Yeah, or that, they don't want to just grow this business and sell it in 5 years. They want this business to be a multi-generational business of impact, more like a Patagonia versus like a, an Uber or something like that.
Right.
Not trying to push those two together, but just saying that they're different kinds of growth businesses. And so I think in that world, there's going to be a ton of growth because there's so much interest and ideas that women have that they just don't have a clear pathway towards. And I think in that world, it's going to be in a much more inclusive stage. We know, for example, that when women get money, they invest it back into the community, and they invest it back into each other. So again, like in 2050, I just expect that to be the reset. That might be the thing. This is a bolder prediction, but it might be the thing that really saves capitalism. In 2023, we did a study with Forbes about the state of capitalism, and most Americans are pretty unhappy with where capitalism is today. They want an evolution. They don't want it to completely go away, but they need it to change. And what they need to change about that is just basically Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They want healthcare, housing, and education. They don't want everything, but those are the things that they're really looking for. And I think women have a stronger understanding of like, well, if you create these strong foundations, the rest of society is, it benefits. It creates prosperity. So I'm like pretty hopeful and optimistic about where that looks. The things that really worry me are, the kinds of aggressions going at women's health or rights right now in society.
Or even like life and period. We see femicide around the world increasing, right?
Yeah.
So it's it is a very, very dangerous time. It's funny when you talked about those three things about healthcare, education, And what was the other one? Healthcare,
Housing.
education, and
Yeah,
housing.
housing.
I would safety to that list. I would say I
Yeah.
just want to be in a safe community, safe environment. I want to feel safe. We tease, but it's actually not funny when there's an on the street interview and they ask women, "Would you want to live on an island of all women?" And you ask men, "Would you like to
Right.
live on an island of all men?" Men are like, "Hell no," and women are like, "Yes, please."
Yeah.
Right? Because it just feels safety is a really
Right.
key thing. And so as women are gaining in power, there's this whatever, people define it different ways and about why that is happening, but it's a pretty extraordinary and pretty horrific thing to be able to hold women back. And back to the VC example, or the disproportion, right, around
Right.
that kind of investing. When you go to micro lending and you start to imagine that you're investing in a cow or investing in something in the community, that is disproportionately going to women.
Yeah.
At one point, there was a foundation, I think it was out of Whole Foods, that gave like 99% of it the other direction to only women. I think now it's balanced out a little bit more, but there are definitely some that are still highly balanced in the 80 or 90% to women. So you've got this really giant gap, right? When we talk about big, aggressive, innovative tech companies, biotech companies, whatever it is, we want to see create this huge financial impact, it's 99% men. And when you think about trying to figure out ways to be able to take care of the community, it's 80 to 90% women. Why is there not, I keep asking this question in the world, some sort of financial mechanism that addresses this in the middle, right? That thinks about it from a patient capital lens, that thinks about it from a community lens, thinks about it through the stakeholder lens. Whether or not we can save capitalism in a post-growth world, it will be really interesting, or define it in a more stakeholder way. I just had sat next to someone at dinner the other night who's the executive director of the conscious capitalism community, who feels really strongly, and kept pointing out to me all the ways in which capitalism is still alive and well and important. But I think there's a lot of questions about how it doesn't consider and the true cost of anything at this point. But as we imagine that we're trying to find this flow between money and the impact that we want to have, I feel like there's a need for, there's just a big, huge gap in the middle that needs to be addressed. And I hope that women would feel confident redefining that as well.
Yeah, it reminds me of something we've been talking about a little bit when it comes to the future of work, which is that there's these kind of two emerging economies. One is, and this is an oversimplification, but it's an interesting framework. One is there's the speculation economy, and that's everything like big tech, AI, anything that falls in that high risk, high innovation bucket, right? Yeah. And then there's the maintenance economy, and the maintenance economy is healthcare, construction workers, anyone who uses their physical hands, and they're actually like pretty. The maintenance economy is the foundation of, at least in the US, the job market. It's also more underpaid than the speculative market, but it's more protected from the future of AI job loss than the speculative market. And so it's going to be like an interesting shift, depending on where AI really takes white collar job loss, on where women sit and where they get that power from. As things get renegotiated as well. I do want to see women in the speculative economy. I want to make sure that they're there, holding their insights at the forefront. But also, if things really swing back to maintenance economy, as we see with like the rise of, blue collar status, plumbers, electricians, like where everyone in Silicon Valley is now telling their kids to become these things, like where will those shifts net out, and will those shifts net out with the benefits of women in mind? I don't know, but it's something we've been kind of thinking about.
Yeah, well, I think a lot about, for me, that there needs to be a whole much deeper conversation around the distribution of productivity. So you call it economics, or you call it however you want to describe it, but this idea that we will have potentially extraordinary productivity driven by robots that can do things without sleep, dark factories, et cetera, et cetera. There'll be more and more that gets produced with less and less people, and so there'll be a lot that gets produced. But right now, the distribution mechanism is that you have a job, you get paid, so then you can go buy a house and you can go do all the other things and keep the consumer economy alive. I think it's going to be a really interesting question as we move ahead and we start to see jobs becoming less and less secure and potentially less available. It will be, I think it is possible to imagine a very big portion of the future in which people do not have traditional kinds of employment in which they've had before. I feel very strongly that that's going to happen. So whether we end up creating small businesses, whether we end up spending more time in our community, I think there's plenty of work to be done. Work is very different than employment. right?
Yeah.
So you end up in this thing where the whole shift, how do we distribute that productivity so that when you have autonomous trucks that are driving things across the country, they're still moving things from here to there, but you're not paying the truck driver or the hotel or the restaurant or any of the other people that were along that chain. How do we navigate for that? And I don't think anyone's really had that question. We talk a lot about big, bold innovation. You sit through any tech conference or any place where people are sitting around talking about AI, they're always talking about the disruption and never talking about, and so this means what? And so this means blank. And I think there's a huge, huge opportunity for all of us to step into that conversation, but particularly women who can hold the short term and the long term, the individual and the community, and are not so afraid of change. Like, I don't think that I'm, particularly afraid of change, because I think that it would work better for many other people. We could actually design this so much more successfully if we thought about it differently moving into the future. But I don't think we're having enough of those conversations yet. And that's why I really do think, again, hopefully that as women become more influential with their power and with their status as a shared, at least financial holder, that we can start to have those kinds of conversations and break it open really differently. Because I don't think we're trying to extend this historical economy and just make it faster. I think we're trying to your point, reset and redesign the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's coming, whether we kind of want it or not in some cases. I think it makes me think of, I'm trying to remember the exact research company that came out with this, but on Monday, so that was the February 22nd, the Wall Street market dropped based on a research report on a future scenario where there's like a job loss of 40% because in 2 years, this AI thing speeds up faster than we had imagined. And so it's a pretty dark scenario where there's tons of job loss, the GDP slips because there's no consumer spending, and then actual payment processors and credit card companies were called out, and the market analysis, they just de-risked and they sold off those stocks this Monday, right? So we're really willing to believe the dark side of these future scenarios, but we don't have a lot of future scenarios yet built and developed in partnership with women or by women themselves. And men can do it too, for sure. We have a primarily dominant, pretty dark narrative out there. And we're starting to call it the vision void, where we just don't see what the world could be like. So I'm also really interested in women kind of coming together and convening around what are these scenarios. I don't think there's just one. I don't think there's two. I think there's probably like 10. And lots of people can raise their hands and go, that's the world I want to live in. I'm going to make a little step to making that happen. But it's not going to be, we don't live in a mass culture anymore. So I don't see it being this like one dominated view. I do think lots of different people are going to have different ways they want to see the future turn out. And I think that's okay, but we just have to get more aligned on what those scenarios could look like.
Or make more space for the stories of what could go right. So 100%. Exactly. There's another person who came up with research in 2020 that called it the imaginary crisis, our ability to imagine the things that go right, that actually we are more just predisposed to imagine all the things that could go wrong, both society and in technology. And if you see that actually in the Edelman Trust Barometer, the percentage of people who believe that their children are going to have a better life than they do continues to slip, to horrific numbers, like really, really sad and scary numbers, which then puts people all into that, fear state, which then makes them very susceptible to messaging that it's all going to be all right if, Papa just comes and takes care of it all. Which is, I think, the message that we need to move out of. And I think women are hopefully waking up to this too and realizing that there isn't this savior that's going to come take care of all of it. It's like, we do know how to do this and start to create some of those stories. We did a thing on New Year's Day where we worked with another futurist named Peter Opperman, and we all did we had an online gathering and we all did a meditation on what we wanted the future to look like. And then we typed it into a little Gen AI and we created pictures of it, right? So 40 of us or so online had this amazing thing. And what you see are very clear through lines, right? Around community, around enough for everybody, around harmony with nature and harmony with technology. I mean, it's pretty simple what it is that we're striving for. It's pretty clear. And so the question is, how do we navigate our way there through this, the system that I think is dying and clinging to its survival, but that we have the opportunity to bust out of and to create more. And I think, again, more of that storytelling, I think is a really, really huge part of it, more of the imagining, the envisioning, but also knowing that this isn't fairy tales. Like, we are going to be able to have a big shift that allows that to make, to put that into our hands. And so I think that that's the fascinating part of this, is what do we want our politics to look like? What do we want our culture to look like? What do we want society to look like? And to your point, I think one of the burgeoning areas of it inside even traditional economies, I think we see a lot of really interesting trust networks and things that are formed in the majority world. But if you look at the United States or in Europe, is women moving more and more into community with each other. As they age, right? Even, well, actually I take that across the way, right? Whether it's before they have children, as they become moms, or, as they are retiring, we're seeing a real shift in how women are choosing to live with one another. And I think that's super duper hopeful.
Yeah, it is. It's really fun to watch and reimagine. The other thing that makes me really inspired is, and you sent it to me, but like the amount of money Mackenzie Scott is giving away. But how unbridled it is, and how it's not like you have to meet these measurements and these goals, which I've worked with other philanthropic companies on these measurement goals, and they're almost impossible, if not challenging, and they completely hamstring you. But just Mackenzie Scott being like, I'm going to give away this money, and I'm going to do it fast and right, and I'm going to feel really good about that. I think that's such a superpower, and it's so inspiring to see. And she's already created a ripple effect in how people, like, she's setting a new standard for giving as well, which is just really wonderful to see.
Huge. I mean, she's a very, very, and beautifully influential in such a profound way. There's actually a TV show that no one else has ever seen, but it's on Apple. Have you seen Loot?
No.
It's a great little comedy. It's about 25-minute episodes, and it stars Maya Rudolph. Okay. And she is a woman at the very first episode who is married to a bazillionaire tech company guy who has an affair with a younger woman, and they get divorced in the very first episode, and suddenly she's now inheriting all this giant wealth, and she doesn't know what to do with it, and she's trying to reinvent herself, and turns out she has a foundation that she didn't know that she had. And so it's loosely patterned on a Mackenzie story. Or Melinda or any of these stories, but it's hilarious and it's funny, and it really has, over the course of 3 or 4 seasons, this profound conversation around billionaire status. What does it mean? At one point the character in the series decides that she's also anti-billionaire, and then all of a sudden the billionaire is getting up against her. I think again, it goes back through storytelling. You talked about this before, about having influence inside an organization or inside culture. I love that there's just a sitcom, quote unquote, just a sitcom that starts to make this visible, starts to make that power visible, starts to make the questions visible, right? Starts to change the way that we start to think about some of these things. So I'm a big fan of people going to check out Loot, and because I think it's answering a lot of the really interesting questions around it. If you ever need a clip from one of your presentations, you'll definitely be able to find one there. It's great. Well, as we are rounding out in this conversation, Libby, again, I so appreciate your time and the amount of time that you're investing. If you could come up with like the 2 or 3 of those things that haven't been studied yet that you want to go run a research study on, what are some questions that you wish that someone could go fund a study on, or that you would personally love to learn more about? Is there anything that comes to mind?
It's interesting. I don't think there's been a lot of research recently on the state of women and finance and investing. Like the research has gone kind of an up and down in terms of their financing around it. So I would like to see a future look with women specifically on like what do they want money for, to build what in the next 5 to 10 years. That kind of stuff is just not there. We're just tracking towards the basic market essentials. So I would love to do that. And I would love to think about how women particularly are handing wealth and financial lessons to their children right now, and how they think about it, and what are the lessons that they're trying to teach or unteach their children about money and abundance and lifestyle as it approaches that way.
I love that. Gaia Harrington, do you know Gaia's work? Gaya.
No.
She'd be really cool for you. She talks a lot about the well-being economy, and
cool.
and sort of wraps up all of the various ways in which you think about economies differently. She has a really extraordinary background intellectually and professionally, and is also the mother to young children. And we did an episode on the Futurist Mom on the stories that we're telling our children about what these economies could look like. How do we actually guide them to a place where they can feel really hopeful? There's a way of doing this that actually holds us all better. Yeah. And I think those stories start really young. We actually even talked about like what would it look like to reconceptualize the lemonade stand.
Oh, wonderful.
What is a way in which we can teach children about money or flow or resource allocation and in new and different ways. So I do think that, again, I go back to young moms and young women who feel confident stepping in and saying, no, the system didn't work for all of us. I think we can do it better.
Yeah.
And I think now, again, that we will have, I'm just most excited when I think about the future, that this transfer of wealth and the creation of wealth, our ability to step into our own autonomy and independence around it will just, to your point, naturally create the shift. I bought a piece of land with 4 other women in Costa Rica that we're creating as a land conservation and sacred restoration project, right? So it's like, this is what we're doing with our time and our money, is investing in these kinds of things, and it feels really, really good. And for me, it's a great ballast to all the craziness that sits over here. When you're working on something regenerative, right, and you're working on something that is really that protects nature and protects the community and gives us, a place of whatever, potentially in the future, it feels, my nervous system calms down by having done that.
Sure.
And so it feels good to encourage more people to find their place, whether it's a community gardening or whether it's a library or whether it's some project that you're investing in, time or money, that you feel is contributing. Then it takes the edge off all the rest and gives you confidence to keep doing it.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Awesome.
And also, just talking about the ROI that women already, because we haven't, we don't actually calculate those investments that women make in their resources, meaning their time into the care economy, whether it's aging parents or children, or just the way that they keep, communities together. So I think it'd be interesting in the future. There's probably a way to pull those data numbers together, especially with the advent of and help of AI, to give more background to what the care economy is doing for this country and how to calculate for that, and so that people
100%.
can use money and time just differently. So.
Well, this goes back, first of all, Oxfam has tried to calculate some of those numbers and came up with some $10 trillion estimate of what it would be, which is larger than the tech industry itself is. And so that was, I think, and that was quoted constantly as a way of being able to start to make this conversation more visible. And I think that when you start to then just think about, again, quote-unquote capitalism and true cost accounting, right? One of the conversations that Guy and I had is Adam Smith, when he was writing his, brilliant books and thinking about this and really being such an influential framer of what modern economics could look like, had his mom living with him, taking care of him. And then when he moved to take on a new position, she moved with him so she could stay and continue to take care of him. And he somehow ignored that entire contribution as he was writing the manual. So I think there's a book called Adam Smith's Mother that starts to make all that more visible. So I think that's, again, been very recent that we've been paying more attention to that and understanding that. And so if you imagine that, again, amplifying, and that's what we'll teach our daughters more, and our sons. I think we'll teach children about the fact that there's been much more balanced contribution than we were giving ourselves credit for. And that's when I will go back full circle to say, as much as I get very frustrated and angry that Women's History Month still needs to exist, the reality is there are still so many stories that need to be excavated and so much that needs to be reconceptualized and really rethinking about this. And so I am grateful for the people who do spend time making sure that we understand that we are not just making this up from ground zero. This has been the course of history. We just didn't track those stories and share those stories and those contributions the way that they were meant to be. So I am grateful for that. And I'm going to create the ancillary Women Designing the Future month and not even the month. That. It's going to start now, and it's going to this is where we kick it off.
Great.
Right? This is the work that we all need to go do together. So thank you again for everything that you're doing to help us see the picture more clearly, Libby, and for being such a champion for this. I'm so grateful that that's what drew you to this work.
Yes, thank you so much, Nancy. This was such an inspiring conversation. I really appreciate it. I hope it will lift me up. I know it will for the next weeks to months to come. So
we'll keep adding to it, right? I think that the good news is we're making this body of work visible, and then we want to keep contributing to it. And I think that we are. There are several women in my world that feel very strongly that we want to continue to have a bolder conversation again about women, money, love, and justice in the future. And I think that this will continue to rep us all into that. It's not even represent, to invite us all into to have tea parties around it. I just want it to be something that we get inspired by and excited about and not so worried about. So
love that.
Yay. Well, thank you so much. Stay warm where you are. And,
yes, we'll do.
And we will let you know when this gets shared. But in the meantime, I just really appreciate you spending time. And I'm so glad we get to be friends now.
Yeah, this is wonderful. If you need anything, let me know.
I will. Thank you so much, babe. Take good care.
You too. Bye.